Welcome to Global Eye. I'm Alec Pollard, your host, with all the top news from around the world here coming to you from Tel Aviv. Let's jump straight into this top story. With us, Daniel Sheck, former Israeli ambassador to France. So the same result as we had 5 years ago between Le Pen and Macron, but is this deja vu? Because the circumstances were different and the result was closer.
I don't agree that the result is the same. The end result, the bottom line is the same, but the result is different. There is a dynamic here. Jean-Marie Le Pen, Marine's father and founder of the National Front, got 18% in 2002. Marine Le Pen got 34% in 2017, and she now crosses the 40% threshold. I have seen results from other exit polls. All of them give Macron as a solid winner, but in all of them, she is over 40%. And if over 40% of the French public believes that an extreme right-wing, nationalist, xenophobic leader is what they want, I, as a French citizen with a democratic heritage, would feel worried.
Could Le Pen or a successor of hers in the party get over the line in 5 years' time, according to this progression that you are speaking of? And if a lot of the things that are happening in France regarding immigration, radical Islamism that we've seen, and other issues that Le Pen has brought to the fore don't change, even if maybe they may not get worse, maybe just in the perception of the voters, things are going in the same trajectory and they want to change something, maybe next time it will be the time that she wins or someone else.
You know, Alec, there are too many moving parts in your question, too many ifs. Because first of all, Macron won't be around. He's term limited. He has 2 terms. He just won his 2nd term. So who will be there to lead the center party? What will happen with the traditional right and left-wing parties that were virtually erased from the political scenery? And there was talk about Marine Le Pen in private discussions saying that this was her last attempt. So who will lead the nationalist extreme right party that she leads today? There are much too many ifs, but there is a dynamic in favor of populist, strong, or people who are perceived to be potentially strong leaders. It's not just in France. I mean, there's a trend in many places in the world like this.
So let's pick up on that. Our senior international affairs correspondent, Owen Alterman, here with us. Just as Daniel Sheck just said, we had your candidate from one of these many nationalist right-wing parties that are emerging all across Europe and growing in popularity. Do you think that maybe this election went a little bit under the radar with everything that's going on in Ukraine, that such a candidate almost won, or maybe didn't almost won, but was closer than ever to winning the presidency of a major country, probably the 2nd most important country in the EU, that is France?
Yeah, it's running the world's 6th largest economy. And yeah, I do think that it was in some sense buried in the headlines by the Ukraine war, maybe rightly so. But again, as we digest the news and really taking in what Ambassador Sheck is saying, it just makes stronger within me the feeling that this is an important event. I remember Daniel Sheck sitting here 5 years ago and saying, you have to think about 2022. These two are going to be back, Macron and Le Pen, and it is going to be fascinating. And now we have 2027 ahead of us, again, albeit with more wild cards this time, but as Ambassador Sheck said, with a definite dynamic and a definite trend line. Alec, it had been thought that populism in the EU was not buried, but had crested. It had passed its peak. It was in decline. And now we have Viktor Orban pushing back the most serious opposition he had faced in many years in Hungary and winning re-election. And now we have Marine Le Pen with this very strong showing in France. And I think that has to be at least brought into question as, again, we start to maybe have more European elections over the next year or two, and to see exactly where this continent-wide trend goes.
It was exactly my next question. You're always leading me here into the next question. It's very convenient. But will these other parties that are similar to Le Pen's party be buoyed or dismayed by this result?
Absolutely buoyed. Absolutely buoyed. The fact that she bested her result from 5 years ago by a significant margin and did as well as she did and was able to mainstream herself in terms of how the public viewed her will be seen as a tremendous advantage to this entire movement. Again, what's becoming, as it becomes more powerful, a very diverse movement. Marine Le Pen is not Viktor Orban, is not Jarosław Kaczynski in Poland. Certainly the last two are not on the best of terms these days. So again, it's a movement that continues to show strength in European elections. Again, we thought it may have crested, but now we have another data point showing strength, albeit not winning the election. So this will not be the third in the trilogy. Will not be the third in the trilogy of Brexit then Donald Trump. This was not the third, but nonetheless a very strong showing for Marine Le Pen, pointing at a certain trend line. And it remains to be seen what the next 5 years in Europe bring. Europe, of course, going back to the war in Ukraine, is in the middle of a significant wave of instability. I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact of 5 million Ukrainian refugees, most of whom are now within the EU, and what that means for the long-term impact on those societies. Obviously, they've been welcomed in the immediate aftermath of the Russian invasion and the emergency, but where does that issue go from here? Where does Russia's influence in the continent go from here? Where do the economic trends and inequality go from here? There are an enormous number of open questions which could continue to give this broad movement more opportunities.
Daniel, what do you think about sort of the enthusiasm or maybe lack of enthusiasm of the public during this election? We heard a lot of people talk about, which is something that we're seeing a lot in global politics, by the way, non-enthusiasm for either candidate, but selecting the worst of the two. That probably in the case of Macron perhaps hit home. Also voter turnout. What do you think about that?
Well, it's a little bit the realities of a two-phased election with 2 rounds. People vote with their hearts in the first round and with their heads in the second round. So for the second round, for those who have lost their candidate in the first round, they have to make a decision, and that was the big battle between the 2 rounds of both Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron to win over these leftovers. But I think that also in line with what Owen just said, I think the most significant and memorable result or number that will remain in people's minds or should remain in people's minds of this whole election campaign comes from the first round. And that is the fact that 55% of French voters voted for the extremes, for the extreme left or the extreme right, leaving 45% for the mainstream, or what used to be called the mainstream. And should it now still be called the mainstream? That's a good question. So that, to my mind, is a wake-up call for anybody who is worried about France and wants to see in 2027 some kind of rehabilitation of the health of French democracy.
Owen, we have 1 minute until the break, but you're great at summing up things in 1 minute. So just give me a quick rundown of what you think of how sort of the EU has looked at this election, and what are the implications as far as France's sort of being part of Europe, integration in Europe, and leadership role in Europe.
Yeah, a lot of sighs of relief across the continent, Alec, that's for sure, and they'll be buoyed. Look, the reality is there are these important social trends which we've been talking about, but again, the bottom line is Emmanuel Macron is back in the Élysée Palace, and he'll be back at it again, trying to build up European unity, European security, all the rest, diplomacy with Russia and Ukraine, potentially now with this election behind him. So he'll be back at it. That'll be good news for the European establishment. They'll be happy to take it, although again, a yellow card for them given this result, and they will be very conscious of that as well.